Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Cluster. I'm really excited to continue on through our cluster cycle as we continue learning about that inferencing strategy that we started last week. So everyone should have their cluster agenda and the passage that we're going to be working with today. So before we kind of get started, I want us to just take a minute to reflect back on our school goals, specifically where third grade students are within our school goal. And I want us to think about how the work that we're doing today is going to contribute to student learning and that student achievement within our school goal. So does anyone kind of have an idea about how the work we're doing within this strategy might do that?
So we talked about last cluster that, inferencing is one of those overarching standards, so we can hit a lot of different standards within it, but it'll support that comprehension not only in reading, but science and social studies and the other content areas as well, and boost their critical thinking as they look deeper into a text for further understanding.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Katie, because we really wanted to make sure we chose the strategy that gave us the biggest bang for our buck, and I like how you said that they can use that strategy across different content areas as well. All right, so our cluster cycle goal is that by the end of the cluster cycle, all students will increase their ability to inference using the it says, I say, and so strategy, resulting in a shift in teacher practice as measured by an improvement in student scores from 38% mastery to 70% mastery on the teacher-created inference post-assessment. So everything that we're doing, we're working towards improving those student scores from the pre-test to the post-test. Bailey, do you mind reading our cluster meeting outcome?
Yeah. It says, by the end of the cluster, teachers will plan an effective think aloud model to support student inferencing, resulting in teachers implementing a high-quality think aloud model as measured by students accurately making connections between text evidence and background knowledge.
Okay, so as we're working today, I really want you to be thinking about how everything that we're doing is contributing towards that cluster meeting outcome and how important, even though the strategy itself is important, it's really the modeling our thinking as proficient readers for students so that they have that as a tool in their toolbox that they can use forever, even when they're not just inferencing. So for the evaluate, I asked you guys to bring your student work that was from step 1 of the It Says, I Say, and So strategy, and that was when we read the book, The Stranger, and we had students to pull some text clues and kind of see if they could make an inference about what the stranger's identity was. So if you can go ahead and pull out that student work. And I asked you to go ahead and kind of have that pre-sorted into some categories of high, medium, and low. So our success criteria for that was if they were low, they either didn't give a response at all or they didn't have any kind of connection to the text. If they're in the medium category, then they might have given a text clue, but they weren't ever able to specifically identify what the stranger was or make a connection to that. And if they were high, they were able to do both of those things. So if you'll go ahead and kind of have those numbers ready. And then we're just going to kind of chart and see where we're at so we can think about the trends within our students. So, Ms. Waldrop, how many students did you have in your high category?
Well, I shared mine with Ms. McClellan. So the ones that were just mine were 9 in the high category,
Okay.
5 in the medium, and 1 in the low.
All right. And Ms. Burns?
I also had 9 in the high category, 6 in the medium, and 1 in the low.
All right. Ms. Hamby?
I had 10 in high, 5 in medium, and 2 in low.
All right. And Ms. McClellan, tell us about your intervention students.
I actually got 1 in each category,
Oh, okay.
so nice, well-rounded.
All right. So I want you to just kind of take a look at maybe what kind of patterns and trends, and let's talk about some characteristics that we saw within that work. So whenever I was looking at my student work, I noticed that just like in the first time, they really were never able to make those connections. So they were either able to do one part or the other, but they were never able to make that full connection. So did anybody else have any kind of themes that they saw within their student work?
So within my medium category, I continuously saw that they were doing the it says and I understand, or, my thinking, but they couldn't come up with what he actually was. So that was a majority, actually all of the ones that were in the medium category. they could tell you what they thought or, take what was in the text and explain it, but they couldn't come up with what did it mean.
Yeah, and I think that text was pretty complex, so we had to do a lot of work with the background knowledge, and we really had to talk through the text as we were reading to kind of support their comprehension to get them to that place. But we know that they're going to need to be able to do that independently. Did anybody else have anything that they noticed? All right, so the work that we saw, those characteristics from our student work really contributed to that identified need. So we really see the need for a strategy for students. So we need to model our high quality thinking so that students are able to see that visibly. So much happens internally whenever we're reading, and we as proficient readers know when to stop, we know when to highlight things, but students don't know when to do that. And when I looked back at my students' work, I noticed that they got a little highlighter crazy and they would just start highlighting everything. So that was when I really noticed, okay, I need to really stop and find a way to model my thinking for students so that I can make that visible for them, and so they're able to do that independently. So identified need is based in our MAP data as well and our SC Ready data. We saw that inferencing was a weakness among the grade level. And we know that since Katie said it's an overarching standard, it's something that they're going to need to be able to do for the rest of their academic career. So this cluster meeting's identified need is about modeling a high quality think aloud in order to make our thinking visible for students. All right, so if you will go ahead and look at your passage. So you were provided with a passage today called Ridge's Great Discovery. So in just a minute, I'm going to kind of step into the teacher role, and you guys are going to be the students. So let's make sure we have all of our materials. You should have the passage, a highlighter, and a pen. So as I'm modeling this strategy, I'm going to be annotating, and so I'll stop and have you guys to annotate too, and that's going to be how I stop and model. So I'll stop, highlight, and then I'll talk out loud what's going on in my head as if I were doing this in front of students. And then Ms. Moore is going to chart what I'm doing as those critical attributes so that you'll know how to implement this in your classroom. We're not going to be reading the entire passage today. I'm just going to read part of it. All right, so students, as we get ready to read this text, I really just want you to look at the title. So we've talked about how we need to look at all of the parts of a story so that we can get all the information possible. So I want you to look at the title, Ridge's Great Discovery, and I want you to be thinking about what might that possibly mean. Take a look at that picture. So I see a picture of like some corn stalks, and the title is Ridge's Great Discovery. Does anybody have any ideas about what they think that might be about?
I mean, looking at the picture, he kind of comes up upon a garden.
Okay, so maybe someone in the story comes upon a garden. We know that we have a character.
Might find something hidden there.
Okay, something maybe hidden in the text. All right, those are some really good inferences. So we've been working to infer some things within our text. So as we're reading today, I'm going to stop and we're going to be highlighting some things and underlining within our story, and we're going to be making connections from those text clues to the background knowledge. So we're going to go ahead and start reading, so make sure that you have your highlighter and your pen ready. Layla couldn't believe it. 4 of the bean plants had been wrecked overnight. Instead of healthy stalks, they were sad little nubs with no leaves. Only the 5th bean plant stood untouched. All right, I'm going to stop right there because one of the things that we talked about last week were moments in the text to stop. And that's how we're able to find those text clues. So things like clues in the setting, character, feelings, reactions. So what I'm noticing is something in the setting. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight where it says 4 of the bean plants had been wrecked overnight. Instead of healthy stalks, they were sad little nubs with no leaves. So guys, now I'm going to talk to you about my background knowledge. So what I know is that gardens should be healthy. And when we see plants that do not look healthy and they do not have any leaves, I know that something is not right. So maybe they're not getting enough water. Maybe an animal has come along. Maybe the gardener is not taking good care of the garden. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to write that, and I want you guys to write that and annotate that in your plans, in your passage. So I know gardens should have healthy plants. So here's our clue in the text. So I see these clues, sad little nubs with no leaves. So now this is my background knowledge. I can assume that something is not right in the garden.
Would we want to include beside the so, do we want to put I can infer so that they can tell that that's going from what we know to?
We'll probably
our
wait to the
inference?
end to do the inference.
Okay.
So right now we're just kind of gathering clues, but that's a good question. We're just kind of gathering clues as we read through the text. So I'm going to kind of step out for a moment here and just remind you about the importance of making sure that you are doing that aggressive monitoring with your students, making sure that everyone's kind of staying with you, stopping to kind of ask those important questions just to gauge where everyone is at.
Okay, so I want to point out real quick the things that Kelsey has done so far. So the first thing that she did is while reading the text, she finds those moments in the text to model her background knowledge, and such as character actions, feelings, reactions, and setting clues. Then she stopped and she actually highlighted the text clues and points out that these are clues in the text.
All right, guys, we're going to keep going through the story now. Ridge clapped his hand over his mouth and just stared at the mess. Finally, he cried out, "We have no more beans to plant." "I'll ask my teacher for more," Layla said, trying to be brave. "I hope she has extras." But Miss Folsom did not have extra beans. All right, we're on the second page now. After school, Layla and Ridge returned to the garden. The stubble of beans still looked terrible. "At least there's one bean plant left," Layla reminded herself. She felt a little comforted by that thought. Suddenly, they saw something move in the tall weeds by the garden. All right, guys, so I'm the reader, and I'm thinking something's happening in the story, so I want to be looking back to those clues, and I can kind of get an idea as a reader now, and I can see that I might need to be listening out for something. Suddenly, they saw something move in the tall weeds by the garden. Layla pointed and whispered, "Shh, do you see that cotton-tailed rabbit? I want it for a pet." "Me too," said Ridge, "but we don't have any rabbit food." Layla nudged Ridge with her shoulder. They watched as a fluffy rabbit nibbled at white clover flowers. It hopped between the clover patches. All right, I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to highlight where it says they watched as the fluffy rabbit nibbled at white clover flowers. It hopped between the clover patches. All right, guys, so that's a clue in the text. So I can see the rabbit's not really a character, but he's going to be important in the story, in my thinking about the story. So I know that rabbits like to eat parts of gardens. So make sure that you are writing this down as I am. So the text clues tell me that the rabbit is eating some of those clover flowers. So now I'm thinking, in my background knowledge, I bet maybe the rabbit has gotten into some of those plants, or maybe some type of animal with the rabbit is eating some of those plants in the garden. So if a rabbit is eating plants, are those plants going to keep growing? No.
So right here, Kelsey, in step 3, she stopped, she reread the text clues, and she did that think aloud for the students to demonstrate what she already knew about the clue. So I know rabbits like to eat plants. Record your background knowledge next to the text clue to show that connection for the students. So you're making your thinking visible for the students.
All right, we're going to keep going through the story. "We have plenty of rabbit food," Layla responded. "Our bunny likes the taste of clover." The rabbit hopped over to the Three Sisters mound. It sniffed the 5th bean plant, and I'm thinking now, I think at the beginning of the story, it told me that that was the last bean plant that was left, because it says only the 5th bean plant stood untouched. It took a big chomp of the leaves. So what are you guys thinking now?
Maybe the rabbit.
The rabbit is eating one of the last plants that they have. What? Layla screeched. Get away from my beans, you robber. She ran to the garden waving her arms. The bunny hopped into the tall weeds. What happens whenever we come up on an animal and we start screaming and yelling at it?
They run
They run away. Oh no, now I only have a 2-sister garden again. Layla plopped in the dirt. Our garden is doomed. She pulled her knees up and buried her head in them. All right, so now I want you guys to try to use that same strategy that I did. Find a clue within that text of this little paragraph right here, where it says, oh no, now I only have a 2-sister garden again. Layla plopped in the dirt. So think about those character actions that the character Layla is doing. Our garden is doomed. She pulled her knees up and buried her head in them. So I want you to be thinking about, what does that mean when someone plops down and pulls their knees up and buries their head in them? What does that tell you about the character? I love the way I see all my friends writing and responding. Can someone tell me what text clue they highlighted and what background knowledge they were able to record from that clue?
I highlighted a couple different things. I highlighted oh no, then plopped in the dirt, and then she pulled her knees up and buried her head in them.
All right, so tell me what your background knowledge tells you when someone pulls their knees up and buries their head in them or plops down.
I mean, that's a discouraging feeling. That's a sad,
Okay, so
sad
usually when
feeling.
someone plops down and buries their head in their knees, they're very upset or something has happened. So I know that Layla is upset because she buries her head in her knees. So I want you, when we come to these moments, I want you to think about times where you maybe have seen that. Maybe you've done that, or maybe you've seen it in a movie, and make those connections between what the text says and your background knowledge. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop there with the article so that we have time to finish the rest of cluster today. So now I'm going to step out as that teacher model, and let's make sure that we go back over those critical attributes that we haven't had time to cover yet. All right, so one thing I want to point out as far as our critical attributes that are going to make this successful for students is that during field testing, one thing I noticed whenever we read the story, The Stranger, is that students were not able to successfully connect their text clues to their background knowledge. So they were able to find the text clues, but the background knowledge was never connected to that text clue. So I knew that we had a need to actually point this out by stopping and highlighting. So that's why I chose this as one of the critical attributes, because students need to find that moment to stop, and then the teacher needs to annotate what that background knowledge looks like in her mind for the students so that they know that needs to be aligned. The text clue needs to align directly to what my background knowledge is. So let's talk about what I did during that moment whenever we were highlighting and annotating. What are some things that you noticed that I did as the teacher in the model?
You were actively monitoring, kind of walking around behind us, making
Yes.
sure that we did what we were asked
So
to do.
you want to circulate and monitor the students as they are doing this so that you can ensure that they are highlighting those correct text clues and they're making those connections to their background knowledge in order to be successful with the strategy.
You also kind of did the bottom where you recorded right near or beside where you highlighted so they weren't confused about where the connection was talking about in the story.
Exactly. So one other thing that we did before, what did you notice that I did before we even started reading the text?
Before we even started reading the text, we went over the title of the story, and the picture is first. So you had us look at the picture and see what we could get from the story just by looking at the picture, what kind of connections we can make from our experiences.
So previewing the title is going to help students be successful because then you'll start to kind of see what experience they have with the topic or the concept that you're going to be reading about.
I like that we just did that as a think aloud. We didn't actually write it because I think my kids get confused with just attending to the picture to come up with their inference instead of also using the text evidence. So I liked that idea too.
And with this passage, you really only had the one picture, so you didn't have a ton of pictures to be able to use. So I want us to look at what connections we can make to the rubric within our cluster meeting outcome today.
I think presenting instructional content.
Okay. What else?
Thinking.
Thinking. All right, so let's open up our rubric binders and let's see what connections we can find within those individual descriptors and how that connects to thinking and presenting instructional content.
Well, presenting instructional content, you've got explicit examples, illustrations, analogies. I mean, that's exactly.
Okay, so we are giving them those explicit examples because we're modeling that for them.
I would say descriptor 3 says modeling by the teacher to demonstrate his or her performance expectation throughout the lesson.
Okay.
And that's what we're
Yes.
doing.
Well, and the concise communication as well.
Yes, making sure that we're very intentional about what we say and when we stop and point those things out to them.
And then as far as thinking, I think modeling what you expect, not to be that do as I say kind of teacher,
Yeah.
just showing them exactly what you want them to do.
Yes. So what we're going to be moving towards now is looking at our text and kind of mapping out that strategy for the week, and then you will go and apply that strategy within your classroom, and then you're going to bring back the student work as a result of that. So for the next couple of minutes, let's go ahead and pull out our text, and we will kind of walk around and support you guys.
So our story for next week is When the Giants Stirred. So we're starting the new module for Tell It
I know that they're going to be working on
So we just talked about, we started a new module today, and that new module was about why we tell tales. And so it was a homophone review, and then it was also going into the fact that tales are just stories. And so today's article was about the purposes. So it told them about how some stories teach lessons, some are about the history.
And this will be a great unit to do that with,
Yeah.
because with tales, there's so much deeper understanding about things from the past.
So we are going to be reading When the Giants Stirred. So it's going to be a legend from a community. And so it does have a little bit of background about the author, and it tells about her interaction with adopting animals and trying to save animals that were endangered. And so I wanted to kind of see if they could think about, based on the picture and her background of endangered animals, maybe they could infer why the animals might be endangered or why she would write about this with an endangered animal.
So whenever I was reading through this, I was thinking about Moana and probably how many students have seen Moana and would be able to make that connection.
I was
'Cause
so
they probably-
Tafiti, yeah.
They've probably never been around a volcano maybe. But let's kind of start looking for like those clues and moments where we're going to point that out to students.
Absolutely. So one of the first things that I noticed was it's why does the author keep repeating a phrase? And so we've talked about how
on the island, on the island, on the island.
So we've talked about that repetition and that we want to pay attention when there's repetition. So maybe pay attention to what are the details or make an inference as to why do they keep repeating it, or what does the phrase remind us to go back and look for.
Because the people in here love their island.
Yes.
And so then later on they have to leave the island, so that's gonna be really important. That's like a more of a foreshadowing
Yes.
of what's to come.
Which they are not
Yes.
going to be prepared for. But again, they do have that Moana background, so I do hope that that will be a connection. So then for going into the inferencing, again, it's starting to talk about on the island, but then it goes into this part I thought was really good.
I think this will be a good place to stop, especially when it starts talking about cone-shaped mountains. And it talks about how most of the time it was quiet, but sometimes it lets out a puff of smoke. I think that'll be a great place for you to stop and have them to kind of think about, like, okay, what are the clues in the settings that we're really seeing that tell us something about this mountain, and even maybe refer back to the picture of the.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going
We
to,
can talk about how that figurative language
that kind of thing,
to that too.
yes,
There's directions and everything, but
I think
we're going to do
page-
paragraph
yeah.
7.
With this, since they have background knowledge, or would you model with this since they probably don't have as much? Okay.
So this one, I felt like my kids are very aware of their bodies,
Yeah.
but they, they're 8 and 9, so they have lots of interesting conversations. So I thought that I do have some, the belch, that they would be able to say, well, hey, I know that when I belch it comes up. Yes, so I thought about connecting that to science too, about experiments, how they
how that pressure builds up.
explode,
Yeah.
yes. So that was another place I thought that I could connect.
Yeah, and I think that'll be a good place too to bring them back to. And let's think about that cone-shaped mountain. Let's think about how what that might be, because they really haven't explicitly said that it's a volcano yet, but a lot of the clues can lead us there.
Exactly. And then I don't know if they are going to know the rain of cinders, so I feel like
Front load some of that vocabulary.
yes, for sure. So that I have before we go into the actual story.
I would think about how I just went to Florida and how there was
This one says that they huddled fearfully in their homes. I felt like that would be a good connection, because even
You can really
though
look at the characters' reactions to that, and then start to kind of make some background knowledge about it.
and they do have, because of the tornadoes and the hurricane, they're
experience.
yeah. So I felt like that would be a good connection for them. Huddled fearfully.
And then would that be the lagoon kind of off from?
And two, just a
the other
great
body of
opportunity to
water,
talk about how those
that could be what
illustrations
leads to the
contribute
fish
to
being
that
strange and
overall deeper
wondrous and
meaning.
animals that maybe we have not normally seen. So I would go ahead and write that right
So
there.
those are the
Things
ones
you
that
just
I
learned,
kind of
just
pulled
write them.
out
That way
for
you'll-
me to
when you get ready
explicitly
to teach it next
teach.
week, you'll already have
And
that
then
in
I
that.
was looking at possibly going further and having them
Do some on their own.
pick one.
Okay.
So honestly, there's 2 on a page, so I thought about having them work in a small group first to do one. And then after we kind of chatted while I'm going around and monitoring, while they're chatting, then I can come back and I can
Give them some
do.
sticky notes.
do their inference on their own and then kind of connect
I think they would feel more successful if they do it with a partner.
That was my thought.
So let's kind of talk about how I can support you this week with this lesson.
Yeah, so I would love for us to kind of continue our conversation and conference. Maybe tomorrow afternoon, or even this afternoon if you're available, so that we could go ahead and kind of finish up the lesson plans and make sure that we're on the same page.
Yeah, you may have to spend a lot of time, but I thought with
Sorry.
the volcano and the flowers, and they have experience with that, but understanding the way these people live might be difficult for them.
Get together this afternoon and talk about that. That way we'll feel prepared for that next week.
Sounds good.
See what kind of votes they had.
If you will start to kind of wrap up your follow-up time and make sure that you have signed up for some type of follow-up support with your ILT member.
Yeah, I think
So it sounds like you have a good grasp on, especially when you take in your trip to Florida, you have a good grasp on how to model learning for the students, how, what kind of support do you think
what areas
that you, like,
I feel like I've got a good idea.
So,
I wouldn't mind,
maybe separate the highs and then do the mediums and the lows together.
a lot of times.
Okay, so I think the best idea for that would be,
What are you guys?
The way that
Sorry,
it
on the
shows.
story. Do you want to do a read through it of, get the gist of it first and then dive into the
Right.
episode?
So you get a good
Or how
idea.
do you typically want to do it?
All right, so let's kind of come back together and just kind of finalize things for today as we talk about how we're going to apply that and what the bring back is going to be for next week. One thing that Katie and I talked about whenever we were setting up her follow-up support is really making sure that we're ready to capture student work so that we'll know whether or not this strategy was effective. So as you're going into this lesson, I really want you to think about what type of work the students are going to produce so that you can see whether or not this was effective in your classroom. So the apply this week is for you to go and implement the strategy within your classroom, doing the lesson that we have discussed today. And then you're going to be bringing back student work that is related to that story and that whether they were able to pull out those text clues and form that background knowledge. And then if you'll go ahead and plan on bringing that and having that sorted so that we can kind of look at those numbers again and see how effective that strategy has been. Do y'all have any questions about that? All right, well, I really look forward to seeing what that's going to look like, and I want to make sure that we go back and revisit our outcome so that we can ensure that we were successful today. So our outcome was that by the end of cluster, teachers will plan an effective Think Aloud model to support student inferencing, which I think that you all have had time to do today during Develop, resulting in teachers implementing a high-quality Think Aloud model as measured by students accurately making connections between text evidence and background knowledge. So hopefully we'll be able to see that they were able to do that accurately when we look at our student work next week. All right, thank y'all.
Thank you.